Hi, welcome back to episode 2 of Undertaker 365. My name is Jacob Vandenberg. I am a licensed funeral director, and with me today we have Miss Holly Barker with the Grief Resource Network. So we're really ecstatic that you're here joining us today.
Thank
I know
you.
we have a lot of information to discuss, and a lot of it's going to be your experience in life and how you've built this network. And then I'm going to kind of bounce some information off you of what's going on in the funeral industry and how it pertains and relates to grief and healing.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate this.
You're very welcome. It's been a great honor to get to know you.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to share
Me
this
too.
information with all of our friends and family out there regarding grief and knowing that you're not alone. So to get it started, we were talking a little bit before broadcasting today about what I think the crux of what grief is in funerals and how that all relates. I mentioned earlier to a colleague that in today's society, a lot of people believe in Google and WebMD and the medical industry, and that's they're all, that encompasses everything. So they can't lie, that's the truth, and everything goes there. The interesting part about that is that a lot of people are now taking the traditions of funeral ceremonies out of their lives. And they're not understanding that grief is certainly a medical part of an experience that you go through upon the loss of someone, or the loss of a job, or the loss of a pet. There's various examples of what grief is and how it pertains to your life. And the reason I bring up the whole Google and WebMD thing is that we put all this value into knowing that there's fact there, but yet we don't turn to that when it comes to faith and funerals. Mm-hmm. We turn away from that, and we don't look at that as being factual. And history has shown throughout time and through centuries of loss and grief and funeral ceremonies that they go together. So the first thing I think that's important to ask you today, as somebody that's gone through this and somebody that is now educating the public about grief, is grief real? Is that a real part of life when something happens to you?
Absolutely, that's a really good question. The thing about grief that I have learned is that it is a new emotion on the spectrum of the human experience. It's not a condition, it's not an illness, it's not something to be treated with a pill. It is something that is a rite of passage, almost in a way, because truthfully, I believe that grief affects everybody in the world unless you are the first to go. The first to go do not have to experience grief. However, those that are left behind do feel it. And when you experience it, it is something that is very unnerving. We call it the epicenter of grief, which is, it sort of takes you off your feet and takes you into a place that you don't really understand what's going on with you. And it affects you emotionally, it affects you spiritually, it affects you physically. And and it's something that going through this whole process, when I was reaching out and I was looking into how to come to grips with what this was. At first, I was thinking, yes, this emotion that I have right now is going to go away. I'm going to recover from grief. And what I have found over the last 6 years is it's not really about recovering from grief. It's not about that. It's about grief is an extra emotion that gets into the psyche, into the experience, and you live with it, you learn to move through it, and it becomes a part of you for the rest of your life. However, this aspect of grief is that it can transform, and it makes you wiser. It makes you more awake. It is almost like an awakening in a way. And the reason why we created the program that we're creating is because we want to help people through this transition and not get stuck in the mud and the mire and the pain and the agony and the physical separation of the person that you lost. I mean, because you got to think about it this way. It's one thing if you lose someone that you are connected with, a colleague or somebody, and they may have transformed your life, and you remember them and feel that loss for the rest of your life. But if you're dealing with a spouse, if you're dealing with a child, if you're dealing with a parent, you're going to experience events throughout your lifetime that are going to bring you back to the fact that there is that that void of physical presence of that person in your life, and you have to go through those things. And so that's really what grief is. And so, it's something that I think a lot of people are afraid of, or they don't understand, and so they turn away from it. And this is definitely, the medical side of it is very needed, because we are very physically affected by grief. However, that's only a portion and a part of this.
Right.
The spiritual side, the ceremony, the sacred ceremony is what I would consider the experience going through the funeral home industry. We did have a time and a gathering in a funeral home for my husband. It was a memorial service. And I'll never forget it for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't shed a tear, because at that moment I was so incredibly proud of my husband.
Definitely.
Because he had people flying from all over the world. We had standing room only, and I'm glad that we did it. And I have that to remember.
It was
for
an
the rest of my
experience,
life.
right? It was something, like you said, it will last forever. It was a moment.
It's a needed. You have to have some type of sacred ceremony for someone. You have to celebrate their life. You have to, it's an ushering in of a new time
Right.
for the people that are there.
Well, if I could take a moment, I was mentioning earlier, I'd like to be a little selfish if I can.
Please.
With the idea and the branding behind Undertaker 365, clearly it's to inform the public and break down the barriers and the stereotypes that surround what the funeral industry is. And obviously I want to hear your story, and I want to hear about the great things that you're doing. And I think you just started to allude to it. The ceremony, the celebration, the memorial, the funeral, whatever adjective or noun you want to use, or place that you want to use for that experience, it is absolutely critical to begin the next steps in your life. And I bring that to the public because I think we're in a society today where we're so busy in our life that we forget that this part or experience that you need to go through, it's kind of an afterthought. We put so much value in baptisms and first birthdays and weddings and anniversaries and all these things that are great experiences and moments, but yet as our society continues to move forward, we're kind of losing that path towards celebrating somebody's end of life, and then celebrating the fact that you as a human are able to move on, and that there's steps to help you. And I think that's a great transition to kind of talk a little bit about the wonderful things you guys are doing down at the Grief Network, our partnership, and then I'd like to kind of bring it all around and talk a little bit about some of the things that you got going forward. So I know I have some scripted notes, but really this is a good conversation just to talk.
Absolutely.
You've gone into a little bit of your experience. Tell me what the Grief Network, Grief Resource Network is doing, and how can it affect and help the people around here.
Thank you for asking that. So one of the things that I remember, this kind of goes all the way back as well into my career before my husband passed away, is that I was actually in the pharmaceutical realm for 20 years. So I was a representative calling on psychiatric hospitals, teaching hospitals, and the whole experience with that led me to the understanding that grief was not talked about. And then we went through the funeral, and we went, the weeks and months after he passed away, I started looking for the resources I needed, and I couldn't find them. And I was in a major metropolitan area. And that was very concerning to me that was the case, because I felt like, I know there's things out there to help me, but I can't find them, because if you know anything about the internet and about searching, there's such a thing as called search engine optimization. So in the local communities, there's all kinds of programs and things that are available to people, but it's not reaching the people that need it because they don't know that it exists.
Sure.
And I knew that was a big problem. And so one of the things I started thinking is we needed an overarching website that would be able to go into all the different areas that a grieving person is affected by, and to be able to have the resources there and the information that's needed by people, because there's a lot out there. It's just they don't know where you are to connect that information to you, and it continues to be a problem even to this day, since 6 years ago. And so, for example, I was looking for a therapist for my son, who was 11 years old at the time, and there was nothing that I could find anywhere that said grief counselor for children and adolescents. It just wasn't there, but I knew it was there. So that's an example. There's another example of finding. I went 6 months without knowing that I had access to widow's benefits, and my son had access to benefits through the Social Security Administration. I had no idea because no one calls you to tell you that it's available. So those are the kind of things that I recognized that not only I was going through, but I was like, if I know as much as I know, being in the being in touch with the medical community like I did for so long, and not even hearing grief being talked about there, and then being in the situation that I was in, looking for resources and support, I was like, I'm not the only one that's going through this. And it's just one of those divine timing things. I had to relocate back to the United States. I'm an American citizen. And I started the website back in 2016, and it literally took me an entire year and a half to build, because it's not just a face front website. It is a search engine that's similar to other like Instagram or Facebook. You have to go in and register yourself, and it's free. It's free for all people, okay? And then you go in, and there is a tremendous amount of work to be done now, but we're getting it going in record time. And over the last 5 years, we've been able to really gather the type of information that is lacking out there, and we're actually encapsulating it into the network. And this goes along with the same aspect of the services. So I know that, for example, we're just getting started with this. I mean, we've grown Grief Anonymous out amazingly well. The online community is thriving. We've got over 1 million people on our front page. We've got 40,000 members in our online grief groups, and we truly know what we're doing now, and we feel very confident about it. Now I'm stepping into this area, and I'm out there reaching out into the community and looking for resources that are needed so that we can find the good resources that are out there to help people, and that way they can go in and find it. So I know the funeral home is a conduit, and Sacred Ceremony is there, and I know that it is a natural partnership. That we're coming back to you as a grieving organization made up of grieving people and saying, hey, we are impressed with the way that a lot of the funeral home industry has digitalized their businesses, and a lot of the information for obituaries are shared online, which is wonderful, because people, that are in North Carolina, where I'm from, if something happens, I know about it because it's being shared on social media. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known it. So there's a lot of good things that you guys are doing out there to reach out to people, and the industry's moving in that direction, and we just really want to partner with you guys because we think it's a natural partnership in helping people.
Yeah. So you brought up what the conduit of the funeral industry, and how your network and resource network and grief in general and healing can partner together there. And the one thing that I would say, and this is a complete education for myself as well as the public, is that funeral homes could do better, and understanding that in the industry we call it aftercare, and that kind of that encompasses it's a blanket statement for a lot of different things. It could be the follow-up on death certificates or acknowledgement cards, or just a simple "how you doing, everything okay," or as you mentioned, the Social Security benefits. One of the things that I think is part of our job and responsibility as directors is to help a family understand that there are benefits available if that obviously attaches to the family, and if that's something that they fall into.
It's critical for some people.
It really is, and even as simple as if you're not entitled to that benefit, and if it's just a simple notification to Social Security that a person's passed away, that's part of our job. And what I think is important is that this aftercare, we take it to another level, because there is a critical communication breakdown there where, as you mentioned, it's a natural thing for families to call upon funeral homes, obviously for funeral services, but also because they think that we understand and know a lot about grief because we're dealing with it. And the problem, I think, is because there's so much available that we don't know about, that we are at a loss to tell people where to go. So that is what one of the biggest advantages I think you have, is that you have a consolidated area where you're able to capture a market and provide them the information and education they need to to help himself. And as a funeral director, I think it's of the utmost importance to get that information to our clients, to our families that we serve, and let them know that just because the funeral service is over and the doors behind you have closed as you exit the funeral home does not mean that our job has stopped. We're here to help. We're here to inform them that there's people that are here to help them. And I commend you for
Thank you.
obviously going through an extremely difficult situation with the loss of your husband, but then to kind of rebound or resurrect, as you would say, to form something that is so positive and so demanding and helpful for people.
Thank you.
You brought up the Grief Anonymous, and this is something I'm super excited about. We've been sharing some information back and forth, and let me tell you, this is something that is completely missing in the communities that you live in. And we have different types of anonymous groups, obviously. I think we're all familiar with those. What we don't have is this demand that people need and that everybody goes through, and that is Grief Anonymous. So I'd like to pick your ear a little bit about the general concept of what Grief Anonymous is.
Okay.
And how it could help, and then certainly what are the next steps and how can you find it in your community.
Thank you. So you have to kind of understand my mindset and how I came about this with Grief Anonymous. I went through I did go through some aftercare information, session with my funeral home. And then I got out there into the community like we discussed, and I had a really difficult time finding the support that I needed. And I'm also, from a personal standpoint, I'm an idealist. And when I say that, I mean I'm in search of the ideal solutions for grieving people. And I also come, like I said, from the medical side, where I truly know that you have to build something in order for it to be sustainable and in order for it to be ethical. It needs to be open to all people. No one organization can be all things for all people. However, we can create it in the ideal way that invites all people in. And I also truly believe that in this era of social media and in this era of the media, the way a lot is headed, where all the focusing is on the negative, and then also if you go on the news, people are debating all the time. And so I think it's kind of trickled down into our society, where instead of having dialogue and having conversation, it's turned into debating. So my point with saying this to you is that we need a space that's sacred. We need a space that is free of chaos and drama, and we need a place that's peaceful, where we can come together as all people from all different faiths and all different backgrounds and all different experiences, and talk to each other in the way that is healing and helpful. And so the way that I designed this is I'm not about reinventing the wheel. And I know that God, my higher power, put into my paths about 4 months after my husband passed away, a very, very dear friend of mine who was a recovering alcoholic and who had been transformed by his time in AA, and he was about 2 years into the program and literally almost died from alcoholism. And so he's like, you know what, if you can't find what you're looking for, why don't you join me in one of my open meetings and see how we do things? And so I went to this meeting, and it was an interesting experience. I was actually on a spiritual journey to heal in Telluride, Colorado. And it was a beautiful little stone church in the valley of Telluride. And I went there, and it was a life-changing, transformative experience sitting there, listening to all of these people and all of the trauma that they had gone through, that had happened to them in their lives, and what they had done through the program, and how connected they all were, and how supportive they all were. And I was floored. I was like, we need this for grief. We just need it. And so I moved back to the United States at that time, and I started the process, being, again, from the pharmaceutical industry. Really, you have to get a foundation. So I got the trademark. I opened the LLC, knowing that I would turn it into a nonprofit, which now it is. And we started, I really thought I was going to be starting with the local groups. And so a friend of mine came forward, and she said, hey, I really want to help you with this. I lost my brother in a freak hospital accident, and actually it was an ambulance accident, and we started an online group just to get some ideas while we started looking in Charlotte for the program. And within 6 months, we had 4 million people on the page, and we were adding 1,000 people a week to our program. We had to stratify it out, and I knew we had tapped into something that was the remarkable experience that I experienced in that open meeting at AA. I did not reinvent the wheel. However, I never read the AA book. I couldn't even tell you what their 12-step program is. We have 10 tenets. We just took the basic structure, the bones of what they did, and we applied it to grief. And the way that it applies to grief and why it makes sense is because alcoholism is something that happens to you, okay, an addiction. And it's with you for life, but you have to use something, you have to have tools, you have to have, and it's a spiritual solution to move forward, and it's a community to help you do it. So it's a singular journey done with people surrounding you. So that's another part of it that we created.
Can I inject a little bit there? Because I think this is an interesting topic to talk about.
Right.
So alcoholism, it could be a chemical issue in your body. Like you're addicted to it, and your brain's telling your body that you need something. Grief is a similar, and that's physical, right? I mean, that's a physical thing. Grief is similar in a way because there are you go through physical reactions to grief, and so the correlation is it's extremely.
It's different, but very similar.
It is. It's super similar when you start to break it down to its molecular basis. I mean, it's a similar situation.
Well, here's a perfect example: broken heart syndrome. Okay, there are a lot of people who have heart attacks right after they've lost their loved one. And you got to, people have to really understand this. If you wake up in the morning and go to sleep with your soulmate for 50 years, okay, and then you go to bed that night after they've died, think about what that person's going through.
The physical pains.
The physical pain.
Right.
And so there's a lot of the similarities, yet different, but I will also say this too, is that another thing about Grief Anonymous is that we know that our population of people, the people who are affected profoundly by grief, they are at risk for disease. They are at risk for homelessness. They are at risk for addiction. There's a lot of things that people become vulnerable to, financial insecurities. There's so much, people fall through the cracks because of this. And the work that we're doing is not just about, putting this program together, but giving back is going back into the battlefield, finding our brothers and sisters, helping them to get unstuck, helping them move into Alcoholics Anonymous, helping them get the therapy that they need.
Absolutely.
Because it is not something that's just about flowers and sympathy cards and setting a place at the table at Thanksgiving for the person that's not there. It is a real profound experience for a lot of people that changes their lives.
A colleague of mine, he's a Catholic deacon. He does a lot of the memorial services and services we have at the funeral home here. During his service, he always brings up at a certain point that I asked that everyone in the room just at one point in the next 1, 5, 10, 15, 14, 20 days, the next month, the next year, just pick up the phone and call one person that's in this room, not even the immediate family, and just ask them how they're doing.
Yes.
And I bring that up because I think that's what you just said, is that the people that are going through these experiences that we know are having problems and they're challenged, and it's reaching out and just bringing them and helping them into a scenario that we can't guarantee will help them, but we know that it's something that can help others. And I think that's a really important part of Grief Anonymous, because I see it in Alcohol Anonymous, and I have friends that have gone through the program as well. And you know what? It's a struggle. And the ones that are able to continue on and live that life of sobriety, they're strong, super strong people. But the ones that aren't able to as well are just as strong, and they just have that. We just need to keep bringing them back. And I think that's
It's the connectivity with people.
Exactly. And that's, again, part of the reason why we're doing this program and trying to really just lay it out there as the truth, because this industry, grief, funerals, it's a taboo. It's not a part of our culture. We do not want to talk about it. We want to put it away in the corner. And
We are
act
the
as though-
oddballs in the corner, aren't
Yeah,
we?
I mean, I had this situation, as a teenager and then going through college, and what do you mean you're going to be a funeral director? I don't want to date you. It's one of
Really?
and but that's the truth. I mean, people, they don't look at this business, they don't look at this industry as being something they want to culturally accept.
Your profession is a noble one.
Thank you.
It is. It just, society is changing. Everything is changing. And so with it, organizations have to change.
Yeah.
And so this is my maybe offering back so that I can be a conduit as well to help the funeral industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because looking back, it would have been wonderful if the funeral home that I went to had the website that had the Grief Resource Network. We wouldn't be here sitting here talking because I would have been able to use it.
Yeah.
And I needed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and here's another thing I wanted to, on top of talking about the similarities, I'm really excited about this. One of the most important thing that I think in terms of people who are in crisis is we have a crisis center on the Grief Resource Network.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to log into and become, you don't have to go through the registration process to have access to our hotlines and to have access to our crisis center.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be building the crisis center out. That's something that we have ongoing, and this is where we find our partnerships
Sure.
within our communities, and to do this. And I'm really excited about it, and we'll talk about it later because it's kind of in detail. But the point is we have a list of 40 different national hotlines that are in and around, focused around people who would be grieving. AA, there's the suicide hotline, and I just went online last week to look, and we actually have first place organic listing for Google for grief hotline or grief support hotline.
Wow.
And we got there because of all of these hotlines. And so now I'm going to be reaching out into a couple of different industries and actually showing them what we have already and trying to put together a true grief hotline, specifically sponsored by Grief Anonymous, that can then stratify out into the local communities, where then we network with different organizations, maybe like your funeral home,
Yeah.
that then gives them resources in the local area to help them.
Wow. So there's been so much information shared in a very short amount of time. This is Undertaker 365. I'd ask that you stay tuned. There is a ton more coming out from Holly, her great organization, and certainly through our program. So until next time, we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.